There was a task we often got given when I was studying film in order to really focus on the visual storytelling happening on screen, and I think you can apply a similar logic to comics too. So in order to see what the visuals are doing and really how effective they are in telling the story, you could try taking away the text in the comic on the top of your to-read list. So does it still make sense through the images? If so, that means the text can be working on a whole different level, and the combination of both text and visuals together will then elevate the narrative. If one of those things isn't pulling its weight, say the visuals are relying too heavily on the text, then the narrative balance can get upset, and it could be that the visual element is being wasted by the text having to do the heavy lifting. For a good example of a comic that works beautifully without words, I wanted to look at Juan Diaz Canales and Juanjo Guarnido's Blacksad and examine just what it is about the visuals that are so effective. You're watching Strip Pile Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So framing in film can be quite different to panels in comics. A big thing is the obvious, right? While film can have movement in the frame, so a character acting, different facial expressions in the same monologue, etc., panels in comics are static. They hold their position. So in some ways, this can be more powerful, as a really solid composition can just sit there in front of the reader and can leave a lasting impression. And it also means that you can have images play off of each other more directly, where film might be more fleeting. But it also means that for one panel to do a similar thing as a shot in film, to show off a character, how they act, who they are, how they exist in the world, a panel in the comic needs to go beyond just a static drawing. And this is the real problem, I think, with building believable worlds and characters in comic books. In film, you could point a camera at someone and just see the way they move through a space. In comics, you've got to do something slightly different. And this is what Guarnido is able to do in various instances throughout Blacksad. So one of my favourite examples, and the one I'll mostly be talking about in this episode, is Blacksad's conversation with Jake, this gorilla boxer. What Guarnido and Canales do here is use the dialogue to advance the narrative and plot elements, while the visuals essentially build character and inference. Sounds simple, of course, but it's a really effective way of balancing the text and visuals, doing two different things. They then support each other and take that further. And it allows the panel to contain multiple instances of time that work individually. So this first panel has Jake almost absent-mindedly unwrapping his hands, while Blacksad stares him down. Without dialogue, you can already see a sense of this scene. The gorilla is casual, somewhat relaxed, probably uninterested. And Blacksad has become serious. He's stopped the punching bag, and is all straight lines compared to the sort of curves of the gorilla. He looks tense, uptight, serious, and you can get all that through the action. He's telling us about the two players in this scene and how they're viewing this interaction. And once you add the dialogue back in and see that they're talking about his past with the woman that Blacksad is investigating, you see how it then impacts their feelings towards that text too. But arguably, both of those elements, text and visuals, are working independently as well. Canales' dialogue is very relaxed for Jake, almost nonchalant, and when brought together, it creates this richer whole. The second panel is the same, a playful expression backed up by playful dialogue. But by focusing in on Jake's face, Guarnido makes this image say something. The focus is entirely on that expression, and the pointed finger. There's something charismatic about Jake, something that a cool film actor would sell immediately. But Guarnido sells here in close-up. He's got that wry smile, a cockiness that some might find charming, and you can feel him playing with Blacksad. But we only get that because the composition is placed so directly into his face. And when we go to the next panel, you get the opposite of that. Rather than being up close and intimate, we're pushed further away, kept at this kind of cold distance by the cool Blacksad. His eyes are blacked out, and while he's maybe trying to be casual, he's harder to emote with. And this sequence then makes Jake even more relatable, because we go back to the close-up on him next. Because Guarnido knows that the most effective tool in the comics handbook is juxtaposition. This dopey thinking pose, again being played perfectly by Guarnido. It leads to this wonderful panel of Blacksad trapping Jake in a small corner, his face cut off by the panel border, still sullen, cold and distanced. And even in that panel where Blacksad is the most powerful visually, he's cut off from us, and our emotional connection is taken straight to that gorilla, Jake. And all of that is done in that juxtaposition. Blacksad looks especially cold, especially distant, because we've just had that intimate close-up with Jake. Without that, it still has that effect, but placed next to Jake, it then compounds that impact. And so we're especially drawn to the fact that we're further away from Blacksad because we got something to play the image off against. And similarly, for us emoting with Jake, that close-up plays against the further away shot. Those things both work individually as nice compositions, but when placed together they add that further level of impact. Which is to say that this page is doing multiple things to create a simulation of acting. By that I mean it's trying to create a sense of reality, of personality and character for these people. And it's doing it not through narrative captions showing it in the monologue of thoughts, but it's doing it by presenting how these characters move, how they stand, how they speak. By using clever choices in framing and composition, how close to place a reader to a character, it allows the audience to understand these people in very specific ways. And that final tier is another excellent example of all of that. Jake laughing, an eye-level view on him filling up the space, outstretched, Casual, charismatic, at ease. Then we get a slimmer panel of Blacksad, his back to us, peering over his shoulder. Mysterious and cut off once again, and especially heightened because of the juxtaposition and being placed next to this panel of Jake. The slim panel narrows him, so we don't get to really see him, and then when we do, he's walked off down the corridor further away from us, far less inviting than the open arms of Jake in that first panel there on a tear. And finally, it leaves us on this scratch of the punching bag, cut off, cold, with an undercurrent of rage. And it's essentially told all wordless, and yet it leaves such a strong impression of who this person is, and how he views the world and these people around him. Guarnido and Canales have created genuine acting here, right? Real emotional heft, and a character who feels alive and present, because of how they're visually presented, performed, and juxtaposed against other images. And this is just one page, right, in a whole series of incredible ones from Blacksad, and you can really take any page from these stories and see how Guarnido and Canales make these characters act through framing, body acting, and juxtaposition. It means you don't have to rely as heavily on narrative captions or anything like that, because if you master those three things, your characters will feel like real, living, breathing people, regardless of their visible humanity in this case, or not. And for inspiration, you'd be hard-pressed to find better examples of composition, performance, and juxtaposition than in Guarnido and Canales' Blacksad. Thanks for watching. And if you're a fan of Strip Panel Naked, you can support the channel via the Patreon, where you'll get access to over 3 years worth of exclusive content. You can find my Eisner Award-winning magazine at panelxpanel.com, and find me on Twitter at HassanOE. Finally, hit subscribe and a notification bell to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and I'll see you next time.